Sarah Martinez stepped out of her silver sedan and looked up at the imposing glass structure of Meridian Shipping Corporation. At 32, she had just been appointed as the new Regional Operations Director, overseeing the largest shipping hub on the East Coast. Her MBA from Wharton and 5 years of logistics experience at competing firms had earned her this position, but she knew that credentials on paper meant little until she proved herself in action. The morning sun reflected off the building's windows as she walked through the main entrance, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. She wore a crisp navy blazer and carried herself with the poise of someone who belonged in boardrooms. But she was about to enter a world dominated by gruff ship captains and weathered dock workers who had little patience for corporate executives. Her assistant, Jennifer, greeted her at the elevator. "Good morning, Ms. Martinez. I have your schedule ready, and the department heads are waiting in conference room B for your introduction meeting." Sarah nodded, reviewing her notes one final time. She had studied every aspect of this operation for weeks, from shipping schedules to safety protocols. She knew the numbers, the challenges, and most importantly, she knew what changes needed to be made to improve efficiency and profitability. The conference room buzzed with conversation when she entered. Around the long mahogany table sat 12 department heads, mostly men in their 40s and 50s who had worked their way up through the ranks. The conversation died down as she took her seat at the head of the table. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Martinez, your new Regional Operations Director. I'm looking forward to working with each of you to take this facility to the next level." The introductions went around the table smoothly until they reached Captain Robert "Tank" Morrison, a 60-year-old veteran who had been running the shipping operations for nearly 2 decades. His weathered face bore the lines of someone who had spent countless hours on deck, and his thick arms were crossed as he sized up the new director. "Captain Morrison here," he said with a slight grunt. "Been moving cargo before you were out of high school, I'd imagine." A few chuckles rippled around the room. Sarah maintained her professional smile. "I've heard excellent things about your safety record, Captain Morrison. That's exactly the kind of experience we need to build upon." "Build upon?" Morrison's eyebrows raised. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been running ships when this company was half its current size. We don't need building upon. We need people who understand that the ocean doesn't care about your business degree." The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Sarah felt the eyes of every department head on her, waiting to see how she would handle this challenge to her authority. She had expected resistance, but not quite this direct. "You're absolutely right, Captain. The ocean doesn't care about degrees, but our customers care about efficiency, our shareholders care about profits, and our employees care about job security. My job is to make sure we excel in all those areas while maintaining the safety standards you've worked so hard to establish." Morrison leaned back in his chair, clearly unimpressed. "Efficiency," he repeated with a slight shake of his head. "Let me tell you something about efficiency, Director. When you've got a storm coming in and million-dollar cargo to move, efficiency means trusting the people who know what they're doing, not second-guessing them with spreadsheets." Several heads nodded around the table. Sarah realized this wasn't just about Morrison questioning her qualifications. It was about the entire department wondering if she understood their world. "I appreciate that perspective, Captain. Perhaps you could walk me through your current operations this week? I'd like to understand firsthand how decisions are made on the dock." Morrison's smile was patronizing. "Sure thing. But you might want to bring some comfortable shoes. The dock isn't exactly designed for—" He gestured vaguely at her professional attire. After the meeting, Sarah retreated to her office, a spacious corner room overlooking the shipping yard. Through her window, she could see Morrison directing workers around a massive container ship, his presence commanding immediate attention and respect. Workers moved with purpose under his guidance, and even from her distance, she could see the operation running smoothly. Jennifer knocked and entered with coffee. "How did it go?" "About as expected," Sarah replied, loosening her blazer. "Captain Morrison made his position clear. He doesn't think I belong here." "He's been here forever," Jennifer offered. "The workers practically worship him. He's prevented 3 major accidents in the past 5 years and has never missed a shipping deadline." Sarah nodded, studying the files on her desk. Morrison's record was indeed impressive, but the reports she had been reading told a different story about overall operational efficiency. While safety was excellent and deadlines were met, costs were spiraling, overtime was excessive, and customer complaints about communication and scheduling were increasing. That afternoon, she made her way down to the dock for the promised tour. The contrast between her air-conditioned office and the industrial environment was stark. The smell of salt water mixed with diesel fuel, and the sound of heavy machinery created a constant background noise. Morrison appeared beside her, wearing a yellow hard hat and safety vest. "Right on time. Here's your gear." He handed her a hard hat and safety vest, both clearly several sizes too large. "Thank you," she said, adjusting the equipment as best she could. "So, Director, what exactly do you want to see?" Morrison asked, his tone suggesting this was a waste of his time. "Everything. I want to understand how cargo moves from ship to truck, who makes decisions at each step, and where we might be losing time or money." Morrison began walking toward the massive cranes that were unloading containers from a ship that had arrived that morning. "See that vessel? The Atlantic Pioneer. She's carrying automotive parts from Germany. We'll have her unloaded and the cargo sorted by tomorrow evening." "What's your typical turnaround time for a ship this size?" "Depends on the cargo and weather. Could be anywhere from 18 to 36 hours. Sarah made notes on her tablet as they walked. She noticed workers stopping to greet Morrison with obvious respect and familiarity. He knew many by name and asked about their families. It was clear he was more than just a supervisor to these people. "You've built strong relationships here," Sarah observed. "These men and women risk their lives every day to keep this operation running. The least I can do is treat them like human beings instead of employee ID numbers." The comment stung because Sarah recognized the implication. As they continued the tour, she observed inefficiencies that Morrison seemed to accept as normal. Workers waiting for equipment that was being used elsewhere, paperwork being filled out by hand and then re-entered into computers, and communication gaps between different shifts that led to repeated tasks. When she pointed out these issues, Morrison's responses were consistently dismissive. "That's just how things work down here," or "You can't run a dock like an office," or "Sometimes the old way is the best way." By the end of the day, Sarah returned to her office frustrated but determined. She had seen enough to know that Morrison's approach, while effective in maintaining safety and meeting basic deadlines, was costing the company significant money and preventing them from taking on larger contracts. Over the following days, Sarah immersed herself in the operational data. She studied shipping manifests, analyzed worker productivity reports, and reviewed customer feedback. The picture that emerged confirmed her initial observations. While Morrison's department met basic requirements, they were operating far below their potential. She scheduled individual meetings with other department heads to understand the broader operational picture. The head of logistics, Maria Santos, was particularly helpful. "Captain Morrison is a good man," Maria explained during their meeting, "but he sees any suggestion for change as criticism of his methods. We've tried to implement new tracking software 3 times in the past 2 years, but he always finds reasons why it won't work on the dock." "What kind of reasons?" "The workers don't trust computers. The equipment is too delicate for the dock environment. It will slow them down. Some of his concerns are valid, but some are just resistance to change." Sarah learned that similar patterns existed across multiple departments. Morrison's influence extended beyond just shipping operations, and his skepticism about new methods or technologies often derailed improvement initiatives. The breaking point came during her second week when a major client, Fortress Industries, complained about delayed cargo and poor communication about delivery schedules. The shipment had been sitting on the dock for 6 hours, while paperwork was manually processed and reprocessed due to a simple error that could have been caught by automated systems. Sarah called an emergency meeting with Morrison and the logistics team. "We need to talk about the Fortress Industries situation," she began. Morrison's response was defensive. "The cargo was delivered within the contract window. There's no violation here." "You're right. There's no contract violation. But the client is upset, and rightfully so. They had trucks waiting at their facility for 6 hours because we couldn't give them accurate delivery information." "Ma'am, sometimes things take longer than expected. That's why we build buffer time into our contracts." "Captain Morrison, I appreciate that unexpected delays happen. But this delay was caused by our own inefficient processes, not by weather or equipment problems." Morrison's jaw tightened. "With respect, Director, you've been here 2 weeks. I've been managing cargo operations for 20 years. I think I know how to handle a shipment." "I'm not questioning your experience or your dedication. I'm questioning whether we're using the best available tools and processes to serve our clients." "The best tool is experienced workers who know their jobs. All this computerized tracking and automated scheduling is just technology for technology's sake. When something goes wrong, and it always does, you need people who can think and adapt, not computers that crash when someone spills coffee on them." Sarah felt the familiar frustration rising. Every conversation with Morrison followed the same pattern. He would acknowledge a problem existed, but resist any solution that required changing how things were done. That evening, she stayed late in her office, reviewing personnel files and operational reports. Morrison's file showed consistent positive reviews from previous directors, commendations for safety improvements, and testimonials from workers about his leadership, but it also showed resistance to every major operational upgrade attempted in the past 5 years. She was beginning to understand that Morrison's opposition wasn't just about her qualifications or gender, though those factors certainly played a role. He genuinely believed that his way of doing things was not just adequate but superior, and he saw her suggestions as threats to a system that had worked well for him for 2 decades. The challenge was that his methods, while producing acceptable results, were preventing the facility from reaching its full potential. Sarah knew that if she couldn't find a way to work with Morrison or around him, her tenure as Regional Operations Director would be brief and unsuccessful. As she prepared to leave that night, she noticed lights still on in the dock area. Through her window, she could see Morrison working late, directing a crew that was securing cargo against an incoming weather system. Even in her frustration with his resistance to change, she had to admire his dedication and the obvious respect his workers had for him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah knew that her next move would be critical in determining whether she could successfully transform the operation, or whether Morrison's entrenched resistance would prove insurmountable. 3 weeks into her new position, Sarah decided to take a more direct approach. She had spent enough time observing and gathering data. Now it was time to implement changes. She started with something she considered straightforward: upgrading the cargo tracking system to reduce manual paperwork and improve communication with clients. She called a meeting with Morrison and the logistics team to present her proposal. The conference room felt different this time. Word had spread about the tension between the new director and the veteran captain, and everyone seemed to be choosing sides. "I've had our IT department design a tablet-based system that will allow dock workers to scan cargo containers and automatically update inventory and delivery schedules," Sarah explained, projecting the interface design onto the conference room screen. "This will eliminate the double entry of data that's currently causing delays and errors." Morrison barely glanced at the screen. "Director, with all due respect, my workers don't have time to learn new computer systems. They have cargo to move." The system is designed to be intuitive. It should actually save time once workers are trained. Should, Morrison repeated with emphasis. And what happens when these tablets break? When the Wi-Fi goes down? When it's raining and workers can't use touchscreens with wet gloves? Do we stop moving cargo until IT fixes everything? Sarah had anticipated these concerns. We'll have backup procedures, waterproof cases, and redundant systems. The benefits far outweigh the risks. Easy to say from an air-conditioned office, Morrison muttered. The comment sparked something in Sarah that she had been suppressing. Captain Morrison, I need to be clear about something. I wasn't hired to maintain the status quo. I was hired to improve efficiency and profitability while maintaining your excellent safety record. That means changes are going to happen. Morrison leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. And I need to be clear about something too, Director. I've seen plenty of young executives come through here with big ideas about revolutionizing everything. Most of them lasted about 6 months before they realized that moving cargo isn't the same as moving numbers around a spreadsheet. The room was dead silent. Sarah felt every eye on her, waiting to see how she would respond to what was essentially a direct challenge to her authority and competence. I appreciate your experience, Captain, but I'm not going anywhere, and neither are these improvements. We'll see, Morrison said quietly. After the meeting, Sarah knew she had crossed a line. The conflict was now public, and everyone in the facility would be watching to see who would prevail. She spent the rest of the day fielding visits from various department heads, some offering support, and others suggesting she might want to give Morrison more time to adjust to new ideas. The tablet system rollout began the following Monday. Sarah had arranged for IT trainers to work with small groups of dock workers during shift changes. The initial response was mixed. Some workers were curious about the technology, while others were clearly skeptical. Morrison's presence during the training sessions was unmistakably negative. He didn't openly interfere, but his body language and occasional comments made his disapproval clear. Make sure you know how to do it the old way, too, he told workers. Technology fails, but cargo still has to move. By Wednesday, problems began emerging. 3 tablets had been damaged, 1 dropped from a crane platform, 1 soaked by a burst hydraulic line, and 1 that mysteriously stopped working after coming into contact with salt spray. Each incident was reported to Morrison first, and each became an opportunity for him to remind his workers about the reliability of paper and pencil. Sarah investigated each incident. The dropped tablet appeared to be accidental, but the other 2 seemed suspicious. She couldn't prove sabotage, but the timing and circumstances raised questions. Friday brought the crisis she had been dreading. A major shipment of medical supplies bound for disaster relief overseas was scheduled to depart that afternoon. The cargo had been loaded and paperwork completed using the new tablet system, but when the ship's manifest was reviewed, critical information was missing. Morrison stormed into Sarah's office without knocking. Your computer system just cost us a shipping window. The Atlantic Pioneer is sitting at the dock with incomplete paperwork, and we have medical supplies that won't reach disaster victims because of missing digital forms. Sarah grabbed her tablet and followed Morrison to the dock. The scene was chaotic. Workers were trying to manually reconstruct the cargo manifest while the ship's crew waited impatiently. Every minute of delay meant higher costs and the possibility of missing tide windows. What exactly happened? Sarah asked Maria Santos, who was coordinating the paperwork recovery effort. The tablet system recorded the cargo loading, but when it synced with the central database, some entries were corrupted. We don't have complete records of what's in containers 17 through 24. Sarah felt her stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of failure that would justify all of Morrison's concerns and potentially derail the entire modernization effort. Morrison appeared at her shoulder. This is what happens when you try to fix something that isn't broken, Director. Those containers need to be unloaded and manually inventoried. We're looking at a 4-hour delay minimum. There has to be another way, Sarah said, studying the situation. There is, Morrison replied. We go back to paper manifests that don't disappear into computer memory. But Sarah noticed something Morrison had missed. One of the dock workers, a young man named Carlos, whom she had met during the training sessions, was checking something on his personal phone. Carlos, what are you looking at? I took photos of the container labels when we were loading them, Ms. Martinez. I always do that for my own records. We could use these to reconstruct the manifest. Morrison looked surprised. You weren't supposed to do that. It's not against any rules, Carlos replied, and it looks like it might save us now. Using Carlos's photos and cross-referencing with partial digital records, the team was able to reconstruct the manifest in 90 minutes instead of 4 hours. The shipment departed only slightly behind schedule. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Morrison approached Sarah. For a moment, she thought he might acknowledge that the technology, combined with a workers' initiative, had actually saved the day. Instead, he said, "We got lucky this time. Next time, we might not have someone taking unauthorized photos to bail us out." Sarah realized that Morrison was determined to see only the problems with new approaches, never the solutions they enabled. His resistance wasn't just philosophical, it was becoming active obstruction. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Every technological implementation faced unexpected problems, worker resistance, or equipment failures. Some issues were legitimate, but Sarah began to suspect that Morrison was actively encouraging problems by discouraging worker buy-in and failing to support troubleshooting efforts. The situation came to a head during a visit from corporate executives. Regional Vice President James Harrison arrived for a quarterly review, accompanied by 2 other senior executives. Sarah had prepared extensively, planning to showcase the efficiency improvements and cost savings from her modernization efforts. The presentation began well. Sarah demonstrated the new tracking systems, showed productivity metrics, and highlighted customer satisfaction improvements. The executives seemed impressed with the data and the potential for expanding these systems to other facilities. Then Morrison was called in to provide his operational perspective. "How are the new systems working from your standpoint, Captain Morrison?" Harrison asked. Morrison's response was measured but devastating. "Well, sir, the technology works when it works, if you know what I mean. We've had to maintain parallel manual systems because the digital systems aren't reliable enough to trust with critical shipments. The workers are trying to adapt, but it's adding complexity to jobs that were already complex enough." Are you saying the efficiency improvements aren't translating to operational benefits? I'm saying that Director Martinez has implemented some interesting tools, but the fundamentals of moving cargo safely and on time haven't changed. We're still dependent on experienced workers making good decisions, whether they're using tablets or clipboards. Sarah felt her carefully prepared presentation crumbling. Morrison wasn't lying exactly, but he was presenting the most negative possible interpretation of every development. After the executives left, Harrison asked to speak privately with Sarah. "I'm concerned about what I heard today. Captain Morrison's perspective suggests that your modernization efforts might be causing more problems than they're solving." "Sir, Captain Morrison has been resistant to change from day one. He's not giving the new systems a fair chance to prove themselves." "Sarah, Morrison has an excellent track record. His operation has been profitable and safe for years. I'm not saying change is wrong, but I am saying that alienating a key department head isn't a recipe for success." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe you need to find ways to work with Morrison instead of around him. His buy-in might be more valuable than the technology improvements." That evening, Sarah stayed late in her office, reviewing everything that had happened since her arrival. She was caught in an impossible situation. She had been hired to modernize and improve efficiency, but the person most capable of implementing those changes was determined to prevent them. She considered her options. She could continue trying to work around Morrison, but that would likely lead to continued sabotage and worker resistance. She could try to transfer or remove him, but his long tenure and strong relationships would make that extremely difficult and potentially damaging to morale. Or she could find a way to change the dynamic entirely. As she thought about the situation, Sarah realized she had been approaching it wrong. She had been trying to prove that her methods were better than Morrison's, but that framework automatically put them in opposition. What if instead of competing with Morrison's authority, she found a way to redirect it? The next morning, she called Morrison to her office. When he arrived, his posture was defensive, clearly expecting another confrontation. "Captain, I want to try something different," Sarah began. "I want to put you in charge of evaluating all technological improvements before implementation." Morrison looked suspicious. "What's the catch?" "No catch. You know the dock operations better than anyone. You understand what will work and what won't. Instead of me pushing changes that you have to react to, I want you to help design changes that you can support." "You want me to help design the computer systems?" "I want you to help design better operations, whether they involve computers or not. The goal isn't technology for its own sake. The goal is moving more cargo, more safely, more profitably. If you can find ways to do that without tablets and databases, I'm listening." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly unsure whether this was genuine or some kind of trap. "What would that look like exactly?" "It would look like partnership instead of conflict. You know the problems better than I do. I know some potential solutions you haven't considered. Instead of fighting about whether change should happen, we work together on what changes make sense." For the first time since she had arrived, Morrison seemed to be genuinely considering her words instead of preparing his opposition. "All right, Director, what did you have in mind?" Sarah's attempt at partnership with Morrison began promisingly. For 2 weeks, they worked together on smaller improvements, adjusting shift schedules, reorganizing equipment storage, and streamlining routine maintenance procedures. Morrison's intimate knowledge of dock operations, combined with Sarah's analytical approach, produced several genuine efficiency gains that didn't require controversial technology. The uneasy truce was shattered on a busy Thursday morning when the largest crisis of Sarah's tenure erupted simultaneously from multiple directions. It started with a call from Fortress Industries, their most important client, threatening to terminate their contract unless significant improvements were made immediately. Their latest shipment had been delayed by 12 hours due to what they described as complete communication breakdown and operational chaos. While Sarah was still on that call, Jennifer burst into her office. "Ms. Martinez, we have an emergency on Dock 7. There's been an accident." Sarah rushed to the dock area where she found controlled chaos. A crane had dropped a container, damaging the cargo and narrowly missing a worker named Rodriguez. Emergency crews were on scene, but the dock was effectively shut down, while safety investigators examined the equipment and interviewed witnesses. Morrison was directing the response, his voice calm but authoritative as he coordinated with paramedics and safety officials. Whatever their disagreements, Sarah had to admire his crisis management skills. But as details emerged, the situation became more complex. The crane had experienced a hydraulic failure that should have been caught during routine maintenance. When Sarah reviewed the maintenance records, she discovered that several safety inspections had been postponed or abbreviated due to what Morrison had classified as operational urgency. "Captain Morrison," Sarah called him aside while investigators continued their work. "We need to discuss the maintenance records." "This isn't the time, Director. We have an injured worker and a safety investigation." "This is exactly the time. Rodriguez could have been killed because routine maintenance was delayed. I need to understand why." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Sometimes you have to make judgment calls about what can wait and what can't. We had 3 ships scheduled in a 4-hour window. If we had shut down for maintenance, we would have missed contract deadlines." So you decided to risk worker safety rather than deal with client complaints? I decided to keep this operation running. That's what I've been doing for 20 years. Sarah felt the familiar frustration, but this time it was accompanied by genuine anger. A worker had been injured because Morrison had prioritized schedule adherence over safety protocols, the one area where his record was supposed to be exemplary. The situation deteriorated further when Regional Vice President Harrison arrived unexpectedly for an emergency assessment. Corporate had received complaints from Fortress Industries and reports of the safety incident within hours of each other. Harrison gathered Sarah, Morrison, and the senior department heads in the conference room. His expression made clear that this was not a routine visit. "I'm going to be direct," Harrison began. "We have our largest client threatening to leave, a worker in the hospital, and safety investigators crawling over our facility. I need to understand exactly what's happening here and why." Sarah had prepared to defend her modernization efforts, but the safety incident changed everything. She found herself in the uncomfortable position of criticizing Morrison's judgment while he was managing a crisis that showcased his importance to the operation. Morrison spoke first. "Sir, we've been trying to balance multiple priorities: safety, efficiency, client demands, and new operational requirements. Sometimes things don't go perfectly." "Captain Morrison, are you saying that implementing new procedures contributed to this accident?" Sarah realized that Morrison could easily blame the incident on distraction caused by her technology initiatives. It would be a devastating blow to her authority and probably end her tenure. But Morrison surprised her. "No, sir. The maintenance delay was my decision. I thought we could safely postpone the hydraulic inspection for 48 hours to meet shipping commitments. I was wrong." Harrison turned to Sarah. "Director Martinez, what's your assessment of operational priorities here?" This was her moment. Sarah could blame Morrison's poor judgment, throw him under the bus, and potentially salvage her position. Or she could take responsibility for an operation that was ultimately her responsibility. "Sir, the accident resulted from a decision to prioritize schedule adherence over maintenance protocols. As Regional Operations Director, that's ultimately my responsibility. I should have ensured that safety procedures were non-negotiable, regardless of scheduling pressures." Morrison looked at her with surprise, clearly not expecting her to share accountability for his decision. Harrison studied both of them. "I need solutions, not blame. What are you going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again?" Before Sarah could respond, Morrison spoke up. "Director Martinez has been trying to implement better tracking and scheduling systems that would prevent exactly this kind of conflict. I've been resistant to some of those changes." "Why?" Morrison looked uncomfortable, but continued. "Because I thought the old ways were better. But maybe having better advance planning would have helped us avoid having to choose between safety and schedules." Sarah seized the moment. "Captain Morrison and I have different perspectives on operations, but we have the same goals. I propose that we create new protocols that combine his operational expertise with better planning and communication systems." Harrison nodded slowly. "That sounds reasonable, but I need to know who's in charge of implementing these protocols. Mixed signals and unclear authority seem to be part of the problem here." The room fell silent. This was the moment Sarah had been building toward for weeks, the opportunity to establish clear authority. But it couldn't be about ego or proving a point. It had to be about creating an operation that served everyone's interests. Sarah looked around the table at the department heads, then at Morrison, and finally at Harrison. "Sir, everyone here answers to me. That's my job as Regional Operations Director. But answering to me means I'm responsible for giving clear direction and supporting the people who make this operation work." Morrison started to speak, but Sarah continued. "Captain Morrison has knowledge and relationships that are invaluable. But when safety is concerned, when client commitments are at stake, when company policy needs to be implemented, those decisions go through me. Not because I know better, but because that's how accountability works. Harrison nodded. And Captain Morrison, are you comfortable with that arrangement? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. The room waited tensely for his response. Yes, sir, he said finally. As long as Director Martinez understands that running a dock isn't the same as running a spreadsheet. And as long as Captain Morrison understands that running a regional operation isn't the same as running a single department, Sarah replied. 2 weeks later, the new operational protocols were in place. Morrison had worked with Sarah to design maintenance schedules that couldn't be overridden for routine schedule pressures. The technology implementations continued, but with Morrison's input and gradual rollout based on worker feedback. Rodriguez returned to work with a minor back injury and became an unexpected advocate for the new safety protocols. The investigation had revealed that better maintenance tracking might have prevented his accident. Fortress Industries agreed to renew their contract after Sarah personally presented them with new communication and tracking systems that provided real-time shipping updates and guaranteed schedule adherence. The most significant change was in the relationship between Sarah and Morrison. They would never be close friends, but they had developed a professional respect based on clear roles and mutual accountability. During her 3-month review, Harrison noted the dramatic improvement in both safety metrics and operational efficiency. It looks like you figured out how to work with Captain Morrison. Actually, Sarah replied, we figured out how to work with each other. Morrison had accepted that the operation needed modernization and that Sarah had the authority to implement it. Sarah had accepted that Morrison's experience and worker relationships were essential to making changes work effectively. The dock ran more efficiently than it had in years. Worker morale improved as safety protocols strengthened and technology gradually made their jobs easier rather than more complicated. Client satisfaction increased as communication and reliability improved. 6 months after her arrival, Sarah received a visit from Morrison in her office. He rarely came upstairs unless summoned, so she was curious about the purpose. Director, he began formally, then paused. Sarah, I wanted to tell you something. What's that, Captain? I was wrong about you. Not completely wrong, you did have a lot to learn about dock operations. But I was wrong about whether you could learn and whether you really understood what this job required. Sarah smiled. Thank you for saying that. And for what it's worth, you were right about some things, too. Technology isn't a magic solution, and experience matters more than I initially understood. Morrison nodded. So we both learned something. We did, and the operation is better because of it. As Morrison left her office, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. She had come to the job thinking that authority was about proving she was right and overcoming resistance. She had learned that real authority came from taking responsibility, making hard decisions, and ensuring that everyone's expertise was channeled toward common goals. The phrase that had changed everything wasn't "I'm in charge" or "do what I say." It was, "Everyone here answers to me," a statement that acknowledged both the reality of organizational hierarchy and the responsibility that came with it. Outside her window, she could see Morrison working with a crew to load a container ship. The operation moved with precision and efficiency, combining the safety culture he had built with the systematic improvements she had implemented. They had found a way to honor the past while building the future, and the entire facility was stronger as a result. Sarah had established her authority not by defeating Morrison, but by channeling his expertise toward shared success. The dock hummed with activity, workers moved confidently between traditional and technological approaches, and ships departed on schedule with complete safety records and satisfied clients. It hadn't been the victory Sarah had initially envisioned, but it was a much better outcome, for her, for Morrison, for the workers, and for the operation they all served.